So this is first time in New York in ages for me. Came in here last week. So I've been here a week. I'm really tired because, well, you know, you get a new city, you want to explore as much as possible so you don't go to sleep. Hi everyone. So my name is Erik Hellman. I work at Spotify. You can reach me in the information there. I will put a link to these slides in the meetup afterwards, so you can find them there. So the reason I pushed this one closer here, because I'm gonna sit here and do some live demos as well, and I saw how hard that was. Anyway, this session, I did this one in DroidCon in London. It's called "It's not a bug, it's a feature." You know, the excuse we always give. As said, I wrote a book. We're gonna give away 3 of them there. We said 5, but we had some delivery problems, so we'll see how much interest this is in the book, because I'm getting the rest of them tomorrow. Yeah, more on that later. Anyway, let's go on to this topic. So this is about bugs in the Android platform. It's not bugs you write yourself. This is about bugs you find and you can't fix. Or rather, you can't like fix the actual bug itself, but how do you work around it? Anyone recognize this? Anyone had this moment? You're like, there is this crash, and you Google it. Yeah. So my job is working on the platform team for the Android client. So we get all of these. So I started collecting them. This is how I came up with this presentation. I have some of them here. So I'm gonna start with a warm-up, and as it is with bugs, sometimes a bug is just you misunderstand the documentation, or it's vaguely documented, or it's just bad, wrong documentation. And sometimes it is a real actual bug in this platform, but it's hard to know, especially with Android, which is poorly documented in many areas. I love it that Google just expects us to read the source code. Yeah. So warm-up and your mandatory kitten picture. The one thing I discovered that was a very popular question is about this one. How many of you know this method? On-save instant state. So anyone had problem with that one? Yeah, a few of you. Okay, so this is actually, because I kept getting this question when I went out to conference, I was talking and people coming up to me, I have a weird Android bug, maybe you can help me. Sure. Free consulting. Yeah, you go read the documentation. I'm not going to read it out loud. You can go here and read it later. And I read that one and I was like, not sure what it does still, really. It's a lot of text. So let's do a quiz. This is still the warm-up, so this is the easy thing. How many of you know this? When is on-save instant state called? Is it called when you press home? Finish? Pressing back? Rotating the device? Probably. We haven't specified any config changes. Starting a new activity. Oh yeah. So apparently, like most developers, they get at least one of these wrong, me included. So I also always go back there. But now I've written it down, so now I know. Okay, this was a warm-up one. But this is a typical thing that okay, the documentation is so bad that people actually run into this bug frequently because we really don't remember or understand the documentation, and the API itself isn't very clear. On-save instant state. Yeah, what does that mean, really? Okay, the lesson here is that you shouldn't use on-save instant state for anything but views, because this is to store the state of the view when the activity is destroyed and later recreated, like rotating the device. But I've seen tons of mistakes done here. I've actually seen code where people put the binder from a service in the bundle for the on-save instant state. So yeah, don't worry if you've made some mistakes here yourself. I've seen the worst ones. Okay, we're moving into a real one. I have code for all of the demos I'm going to show, and you can find that on my GitHub account, so you can test this yourself, including this one. So I'm not going to run this because it just crashes. It's not so fun to run something that just crashes. Just going to talk about it. So you have an app widget. How many here writes app widgets? What? Not more? Okay. You should write app widgets all the time. It's awesome. So this is a stack widget that you can use on your home screen. It's for YouTube uses it, I think, and the gallery apps and stuff like that. You can actually flick through the images you have there. So very typical, you have the method called getViewAt, which gets the view for that position in the collection, like that you have there. Very simple, we just set an image bitmap on that view, and then we return the remote view, and voila, done. Now, what if we do this? Your app widget is backed by a content provider. Not very strange, right? Quite common. Maybe we have, like, I don't know, a database of tracks, albums. So you do this. In your getViewAt, you do the content resolver call, and you get the input stream, and you get the album photo there, because you back that one up in, not in the SQLite database, but through the content provider. And you set that image there. Anyone knows what happens if you put this one on the home screen? Any guess? Except that it will crash. Well, yeah, sorry. Also, the content provider in this case that you will find in the sample code, it just returns the parcel file descriptor for that bitmap. Okay, so you run this, you take the widget, you place it on your home screen. This is what you get. Security exception, permission denial. Anyone know why? Sorry, you're running in the... Yeah, exactly. The widget is running in a different process. So when it's calling your thing, it's calling it over binder, and then it's calling with a different user ID. This is what it says here. It actually states the UID there and things like that. So, but the problem here is that requires a provider to be exported or grant URI permission. The problem with this bug here is that none of this, it states here, is possible to do. You can't use a grant URI permission for an app widget like that. So the solution here is the following. Binder, clear calling ID, and then restore calling identity. 2 lines. If you don't use these, well, these two, they just basically reset the UID that is running in current context there to be the one that is in your app instead, so that the content provider call that you do is valid, has the right permission. But you have to remember to restore this, otherwise you have a security problem. Not documented. So you need to understand what calling identity is and how the binder works to deal with this. Moving on. This. Anyone had a problem with that they had a broadcast receiver and you listen to a system broadcast, install the app, but you never receive it? Happened? Like this, user present. I love the user present one. It's a great broadcast, because you can kind of like fake auto starting without a permission. So you add this, you can start your activity automatically when then the user opens the app, unlocks the phone, sorry. Anyway, this won't work. Anyone know why it won't work? Well, apps must have been started once before registered receiver will be triggered. Also not documented. Okay, now we're going to do something more advanced here. How many of you really know how the service works? These of you who really understand the service lifecycle and how the service works, raise your hands. Okay, nobody dares to anymore, I guess. Okay, sorry. Well, so you check the documentation. So multiple clients can connect to service at once. However, the system calls your service onBind method to retrieve the iBinder only when the first client binds. the system then delivers the same binder to any additional client that binds without calling onBind again. Clear, right? Absolutely. Let's check some. So this is, I'm going to run the app first. I'm going to look at the code. Bad service binding. So what this basically does here, in every lifecycle callback that we have both in the service connection object and in the service itself, just prints out the toast in which method it was called. So we see what happens. Actually, I will show you the code first as well, so you understand. There we go. So this is the main activity. It has two methods for each of the buttons. So and I have the service connection class here, implementing that one, just printing out a toast in on service connected and on service disconnected. And I can do several bindings. So basically, I create a new service connection object. This my service con. Every time I press do bind service, I store that in a list. And when I press unbind, I just empty the list. Just unbind each of the objects in the list. Very simple demo case for this. Now we'll see here. I will go to my service. It's very simple. It has a local binder because we're running in the same process. It's null from the start, and this is where the problem is. I'm going to talk about that. We have the onBind. We have the toast here. I have the onCreate where I do a toast, and an onUnbind where I do a toast. And finally, on start command, the first time we start the service, I create the binder here, and then we have the onDestroy. The binder itself doesn't do anything because we're not doing anything about that thing right now. So let's go to check how the app works. So if I call start service, onCreate is called, on start command is called. Nothing strange. We have a binder object that we can bind to, and I call bind service, onBind called, on service connected call. Nothing strange there. Many of you have probably done this before, right? We can unbind from the service, and I can keep binding several times. And notice now that only the first time did onBind get called. And the same thing goes with, now we have to wait until the toasts disappear, but yeah, the unbind should be called as well. Apparently it didn't. Anyway, my point here was that we see that the binding work is expected, and we can bind and unbind and all that. Now, what happens if we... I know we'll have that wrong. What happens if I don't call start service the first time so that the service is, the local binder, the binder object here is null? Well, let's try that. The service has been destroyed, so I just call bind service right away. I get an onCreate call. I get an onBind call from the service, but I don't get an onService connected. Well, that's expected. It's null. Okay. We call start service. It will create the binder object, but nothing happens. So the problem here is, let me just get back to the code, is that the onBind and onUnbind are only called once during the life cycle of the service for each intent that we bind with, use for binding. So if the binder here is null, that's also the binder the value that gets cached by the system. And there is no way around that unless you actually stop the service and destroy it. Yeah, not very well documented. You have to really test this to yourself. But this is also something I've seen happening several times, and people have come up and asked me about it. So yeah, watch out with that one. Now, did you notice something else here? We're gonna go back to here first, and yeah, this is also just another example of how that could be. One popular way is to use Messenger to do async communication with the service instead through a messenger. So It will look like that instead. Same problem. So the first lesson is that the binder object is cached by a system, so you should always create the binder object at service initialization or in onCreate. Very, very important. Number 2 is you can pass parameters to onBind in the intent. Everything but the data URI and the action string is stripped away in onBind. But you can put parameters in the data URI. And that way you can cheat your past this, and you can return different binders for different scenarios. Very useful, actually, if you have that kind of service design. Okay? Now, one other thing here. Anyone know when onService disconnected is called? Is it called? Let's go back to my demo here. So I will start the service. There. Just make sure it's destroyed first. Start from the beginning. We start the service, so it's got the binder object. We bind once. onBind gets called. onService connected gets called. I know it's a little bit small maybe to see, but onService connected is called. Now, if I click unbind, I should get an onService disconnected call, right? That's what we think. That's the API looks like that. Well, we don't. Because if you check the documentation, it actually mentions this. In the brief documentation, it doesn't mention this. Call when a connection to service has been lost. Yeah, well, that's what happened, right? Well, if you go in and check the more deeper documentation, this binding to the service will remain active, and this typically happens when the process hosting the service has crashed or been killed. That's the only time the process that you were binding to, if that crashed, which means that in our case it will never happen because we have a local service. So yeah. So the right way to always do it is to make sure that any reference you have to the binder object that you get from the onService connected, you should always set to null before you do unbind service, just to be sure. Okay. Well, lesson learned here. Read the Java doc more properly. I've made this mistake myself a couple of times. So yeah, this bug kept me awake for 2 weeks. And this one was really hard to find. So I'm going to demo it to you. Let's see here. Let's see. Let's hope the music plays now. But we're writing music player, for instance. You know, playing music. The user leaves the app. And some users have a tendency to do this, because they believe that that saves memory. Fine. Now, our app listens to the user present intent broadcast. So the app will now receive user present. I'll show you the code later. Let's look at the code. And yeah, this is one. And enter presentation mode. Oh, sorry. So the service in this case is very simple here. It just has a media player that plays a song when we start it, and we can also stop it. When we start it, we also do start foreground here, which puts up a notification. The typical way of keeping the service running in the background after the UI has gone away, like we do for a music player or many other applications. Now, let's see here. Let's go to the activity. Activity does the same thing here. Oh, it's very typical here. It binds. Now we bind in on resume and on pause. You should probably do that in on start and stop, but never mind. I start the service and I bind to the service, and then I have a button called for calling start foreground job in the service. I have a typical AIDL interface that I get here. Nothing strange. I don't kill my app anywhere. Yet, whenever I do this, oh yeah, I missed the broadcast receiver also for the code. Let's check that one. Hard to navigate with one hand here. So I also have a receiver here. Let's check the manifest so you see that it is actually... Here we go. So this is what the manifest looks like. I have a receiver. I have the user present. If we go to receiver, I don't do anything special there. I just print out. Nothing weird. I can actually take away that one and it will actually print the toast. We would hope. Now, user would leave, swipe away that one, everything keeps playing, the user locks the device, user unlocks the device, and because we're interested in user present, what's happening? That shouldn't be happening. And didn't matter, you can Google this as much as you want, there is nothing answering this. Until, well, this is a process for doing this. You can take this code and you can just repeat this yourself. You'll see what will happen. Doesn't matter which version of Android you go for. It's present in Android 5.0 as well. The way to solve this is to use the method onTaskRemove, which is a callback what happens when a user swipes away a task in the task manager. In the link here is a blog post which describes the problem. It's a bug in the activity manager, and it hasn't been fixed. I raised this to Google, talked to Chet Hayes about it. He was like, well. Literally. So there are bugs filed on this as well, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. Maybe they will fix it. Now this one was also very, very difficult. So we have native library, shared native library in our application, which is shared among other clients. This one happened. We got find library turned null. We got an unsatisfied link error when we tried to load the SO file. The SO file was there in the APK. Everything worked. It should worked. But on a very, very low % of the devices, sometimes they got this. The SO file wasn't there. We had no clue. And we searched, and we searched, and we searched, and in the Chromium project for Android, we found this. It's too small for you guys to read here, and I'll have a link to this code in this presentation as well. Basically, there is a bug, and the funniest thing here is, for those of you who see close by, you see here, workaround for B13216167. And, you know, in Googleplex, Android review, git corp google.com/, that one. Yeah, I tried to get information about this bug, and there is like nothing. Google knows it internally and knows that there is a bug, so they have a workaround. They have a library loader helper that when this occurs, they basically extract the SO file manually, copies into the private data store, and loads that one. Yes. So anyway, now that you know this, you will note if you have a native code in your application, it happens more frequently with large native libraries. So it's probably some timing issue. I haven't been figuring it out yet. But now you know what the problem is. You might have seen it. You know where to fix it, so you can just go and well, steal this one. The library loader helper.java from their project. Just drop it into your project and use that one, and you're fine. Kind of weird bug, though. The x86 JIT bug. This was something we ran into a couple of weeks ago. Really weird. Let me show you. Here. Typical photo. We want to blur it. So there is an algorithm called stack blur. It's really fast. It works well. Used everywhere. So what happens, I just called stack blur on this one, so everything should work fine. This runs well on anything but x86. Bam. Funny thing, That is, this is the exception. Array index out of bounds with an array size that doesn't really match. Something is wrong. Something is totally off. If you debug this, it never happens. If you put on the debugger, you never run into it. The only way to get around it is to turn on VM safe mode equals true on x86 builds. And that solves it. There is a bug in the JIT compiler, for x86 at least, which indicates that there probably are other bugs as well. So I would guess that when you run into this, there's like this weird thing that happens. It shouldn't be a crash here. We have unit test that runs on host that verifies your code is working, but you still get the crash on the device. Well, try this. VM safe mode equals true. In the specific case of using stack blur on x86, well, x86 devices are pretty rare, but we never know. Might be more of them soon. Similar bugs might exist on ARM, so. But in this case, with the blur there, I would say use render script instead, especially if you're targeting API levels above 15 and such. We have to talk about this one as well, the last one. How many of you have run into the 64K method limit? Yeah, of course. How many of you did this because of Google Play Services? So we all love the Google Play Services 6.5 that came out that has like this modular dependency management, so you can not need to import the whole thing. It's great. Anyone here have never heard of the 64K method problem? Well, yeah. So basically, it's like the index that is used in the dex file to index each of the method references is stored as a short, 16-bit, what means 64K methods references in one single dex file. The recommendation from Google has been, well, split up your project in multiple dex files and load them with a class loader instead. Yeah, thanks. So what you can do, what they added a couple of months ago even, I think, was a couple of options for the dex tool, the tool that takes the Java classes and compiles them over to dex files. So multi-dex. Basically, it splits them up. You provide a list of your main classes that needs to be in the first one, probably like your main activity and your application. And then it will just pick the other ones as it goes. They also added in the support library the multi-dex application. How many of you who had a problem has checked this out? And do you guys know what the impact of this is? So when you're running on anything lower than Lollipop, what it will do is, when the application starts up, it will copy the extra dex files you have to your internal storage on the first install or on the update. So you do an I/O operation on the main thread at startup. Exactly the thing we were told not to do. Well, that's the only way to do it. We need to load them as soon as possible. Otherwise, you can't find the classes and your app will crash with a class not found exception or whatever. They made it really simple in the later Gradle plugins. You just do multi-dex enabled equal true, and it will do the multi-dexing for you. So it's really simple to do these days. Lessons learned with that one: use ProGuard. Configure your ProGuard a little bit more. Stop using these huge libraries like Guava. And anyone use Guava in their Android app? Yeah, you really don't have to. There are better alternatives. And you write it yourself if you have to. Just copy that class that you use. Only use multi-dex as a last resort. Avoid it for release builds. Rely on ProGuard as far as possible. Like your internal debug builds, I can understand that you need to do this. But that's okay, you usually run on a high-end device. But users with low-end devices, older devices, suddenly going to start loading, copying stuff on the main thread. You might get an ANR on the first startup, and they will uninstall your app. Anyone here heard of Jack and Jill toolchain? Great, and you know what that is. But Jack and Jill is a new toolchain being developed on the AOSP, so you can find it there. It contains, it's a completely new tool chain, bypassing the Java class compile step and the Dex compile step. Not ready for production use yet. You can try it out, but yeah, that one will solve a lot because it will allow for more heavier and more efficient obfuscation step. Okay. Conclusion about everything of this is that Android documentation can be vague. You Google engineers are just like us. They do mistakes. And a good way to do when you get these weird bugs is go to Android XREF, which has indexed all the Android open source project, different versions. So you can go in there and browse the code and discover what is happening on this specific device with this specific Android version. Submit bug report and patches. Google actually reads every bug report. They don't ignore them, as some people claimed. The code samples here are on my GitHub account. Erik Hellman is my GitHub account, so you can find them there. The only one that's not there is the stack blur bug, the x86 one. I have to clean that one up a little bit first. Other than that, thank you for listening. Any questions? Questions?